Hey, game makers. Let's game dev. So, got a brand new blank project, essentially blank. Go ahead and delete this. Uh, the first thing, like I know a lot of times we start a new project and we create a new room and we jump right into that room and we start fiddling with our game character. It's the most fun part. It's uh, important, obviously, but I like to take one other step before I do that, and I create another room. So this is going to be my room test, and I've got room init, room test. Uh, and the reason I do this is I always like to have a starting room that is not just game dev testing. Uh, the earlier you can essentially put in a press start screen, the better, because oftentimes what happens is we start building our game, we start adding all of these things like weather controls and daytime uh, management, inventory management. We get really deep into mechanics and systems, and then it's like, okay, now we need to make this work when we don't start in the room that is the game. Now we have to figure out, when does the camera system get initialized? When does the save data get initialized? All of these things then have to be extracted out of all of these like objects you've just dropped in your game room that you don't want them all. Excuse me. You don't want them all dropped in your game room. You want them to already be there when you're in the game. You always already want to have access to your save data in your camera. So it's nice to have kind of that dividing line of, when I build a new system and I expect that system to be available in my game, then it should be initialized out in my init room. Then I can transition into the test room. So let's set up that very basic idea and maybe do like a fun like transition thing. So make our rooms a little different so we can tell that we've moved rooms. So test is going to be a nice dark gray. It's nice. And then room init. We'll keep that black and small. No, we'll come back to resizing this room in a future video when we go over camera resolution, all that fun stuff. So for right now, we'll leave that here, and we're going to create an object. This is going to be like my object that manages, building a whole bunch of stuff in the future. It's just going to be a general like kind of game manager. But for right now, it's just going to worry about going from room init to room test. And we'll make sure it functions like our press start screen. So we'll have a button that we have to push. So say, let's call it object press start for now. We can always rename stuff. It's not a big deal. So we're going to it. This will definitely change in the future. And it's actually important to realize that game development is organic. It's like an art form. Sometimes you just have to rough draft things in and be willing to go back and fix or paint over or build up and expand on things. So don't worry too much about how to do stuff the right way or do stuff that you won't have to change later. That's a waste of time. You will have to change it later. So don't worry about it. So I'm just going to call this object press button. We dropped it in here. Let's go in here and say, get it to write something on the screen. Text align. Set H line, draw set V line. I hate these functions, which is why I don't use them. So throughout this series, you are going to see me drag and drop a number of second monitor, a number of helpful scripts right into my project. So here is that folder. This folder is up in Dropbox, so you can also have access to this, and I'll put a link in the description below. So if you see me just drag a function from off screen into my project, that's where it's coming from. So I'll try and open them up, or at least give a little bit of an introduction as they come in, so that you're just not like, hey, what was that? Because I've built up quite a library over the years, and I try and keep this updated as I use some of these and realize they don't work anymore, or they're poorly written. I update them. So I'm gonna hide that back over there. And I'm going to bring in, boom, draw set text alignment. So this is a perfect example. Wow, it's been a long time since I've used this apparently. Or maybe I have a different version. Wow, it's really been that long. Hard time believing that. So here's a good example of what old function looks like. All that. This is function draw set text alignment, and we're going to take, wow, argument 0, argument 1, argument 2. Love it. Okay, so we're going to, slight detour, we're going to convert this to GMS 2.3 functions because it's this old. Not anticipating this. That's how live this this video series is going to be. I don't do any prep work. Yeah, you're lucky. I have a bullet list on my right monitor that has a single bullet point for what I wanted to cover in this video. So enjoy that. Okay, so first argument is going to be our alignment macro, which are, you can see listed above. And then our second argument is our color, which is optional. That's going to be, if we don't have it, draw get color. And our third is font, which is optional, draw get font. And that all set up. Now we can get rid of all that. Color. And font. Alignment. Okay, so hopefully I don't have to do that every time I bring a new function in, but let's begin our at func, set text alignment, color. I put little square brackets around optional arguments in the help text and font. There we go. So I don't need a semicolon. Never need a semicolon, whatever. Okay, so now that that's fixed, say right click that, open an Explorer. It opened up here. Grab helpful scripts folder, drag that back over here and replace that. So if you decide to bring this script into your project, you won't have to do what I just did because I've already done it for you. There we go. So I like to have a group for, these are just kind of general helper functions. So we can just name the group that and get that in there. Okay, back to our press start object. Almost forgot what we were doing for a second. So we're in the draw event. Let's say draw set text alignment. Alignment is font align. Now we got all these helpful ones. We're going to do center middle. And we're going to say C white, and we don't have another font, so there we go. Say press. You can't just write text. You have to draw text. Right now we're going to do room width divided by 2, room height divided by 2, and press spacebar. So obviously this is stupid, dead simple stuff, that's okay. We just want to have that division of not in-game and in-game. And we can even like shortcut this later so we don't have to press spacebar every time we run our game. But the division's important. At least I think it is. Who cares? So now I'm just, if keyboard check rest vk space, we're just gonna go to room test. And we'll come back to this, add a create event, add all sorts of other stuff as we move forward in the project. So there we are. We're going to get to room test now. Let's actually run this and see if this works. So I've probably forgotten something. I always forget stuff. That's okay. Hey, look, it says press spacebar, and we're in our blue room. So we're in our test room. We're good to go. That is pretty boring, though, isn't it? There's tons of transition tutorials out there, and I know that I'm going to want a transition system at some point in this project. It's just such a core element of any project, regardless of the type of project you're doing, which I still haven't fully decided on what I'm doing. So let's do that, because let's build a transition system, because that's fun. It's one of those things that I've noticed in my experience game deving, that the longer you use room go to and expect those instant room transitions, as soon as you don't want it to be instant, you're in trouble. I mean, not in trouble, you're just in for a lot of work. The second you're like, oh, I'd really like to do this, and then have it fade out and fade back in, or have a screen go white and then be in a different room, trying to extract the room go to and all the behavior you built around an instant room transition is a total pain. And if you don't know how to do non-instant room transitions, like a simple fade, then it's just going to be even more difficult. So I like to get that in ASAP. So we're going to build one real fast. This is a really simple one, and we're definitely going to make it more complicated in the future. But I'm not going to worry about making it super complicated for every type of transition I might ever want to do in the future for this project, because I don't need that right now. I expect I will have to rewrite this to make it more robust in the future, and that's okay. So I'm just going to say object fade transition, a create event, definitely going to want a draw event. We're definitely going to need some sort of alpha variable. I mean, we could use image alpha, but it's not technically accurate. Image alpha is kind of a weird variable. It's like, it's good for like drawing your sprites and stuff, but if you're not drawing your sprite, if you're not drawing a sprite, then yeah, it's kind of weird. I don't know. I'm just going to do my own alpha. Alpha equals 0. And we're going to make our fade black. Now that I think about it, back here real fast. For now, I'm going to change this into red. So we go from red to blue, so we can at least see our transition. So our fade color is going to be black. We're going to need a fade timer. So timer equals 0, length equals, we're going to say just 30 frames. And that should do it. So we'll start using those in a second. So let's just you draw a rectangle. We could draw clear alpha, I think. Does that work? I'm not positive that'll work. Let's try it. See, even after using GameMaker for like 13 years, there's still stuff you don't remember if it works or not. Things change. So we just try it. Also, we're going to use our color variable. Okay. So I guess we could just do this. Just set a fade transition object since it doesn't do anything yet. Just add it to our room. And let's see if that works. Let's see if the screen's black instead of red. Hey, that does work. Cool. Let's see if we can make it a dark red by changing the alpha to like 0.5 or too dark? Is that too dark? About 0.95. So it should still be kind of red, but I just want to see if that alpha is actually. I don't think that's working. No, I don't think that's working. Add a quick animation. Sign. Get timer. I don't know. This is going to look hilarious, but whatever. We're going to pass essentially a random incrementing number into sign and get a value between -1 and +1. We'll see if that works. See, I'm not seeing any sort of fluctuation at all. So I'm guessing draw clear alpha is not going to work for this purpose, which, unfortunate, that would have made things pretty easy. We can draw a rectangle though, but you know what we're not going to use? We're not going to use draw rectangle. Draw rectangle is silly. I don't like it. It's slow. It doesn't scale with your application surface. In fact, none of the draw shapes do. They're all slow. They're all, I don't like them. So I've replaced them. Let's go over to helpful scripts and grab draw rectangle sprite. This one I do use more often, so it is properly formatted, and it just draws a rectangle based on sprite rather than whatever draw rectangle does under the hood. It's slow. Drawing a stretch sprite is way, way faster. So it does require that I have a little pixel sprite. So I'm going to say sprite pixel. This is always handy. It's always handy to have at least one little white pixel sprite project. Edit image, fill that in one. Make sure origin's in the top left. There we go. Our transition, draw, rectangle sprite, sprite pixel, x is 0, 0. Oh, right. So we could do this. The width is display. Since we're in the draw GUI event, the width is our GUI width. And yes, throughout this entire series, I am going to be saying GUI for the GUI layer. I don't care. That's how I say it. Tell me how I'm wrong in the comments. So display get GUI width and display get GUI height, and I've got my equal sign. Holding Alt and Shift, I can move the cursor to be on 2 lines, so I can add 2 equals at one time. We've got our width and our height, and it is not an outline, it is a color, and it is an alpha. So there's another cool thing about using draw rectangle sprite instead of draw rectangle. Color and alpha are built right in. It is solid color only. I know draw rectangle color does the cool like shifting between corners. In that case, yeah, go ahead and use that or write your own function. But there we go. So now our alpha is 0.5. Should be able to see some color variation here. Yeah, there we go. So now that's what I should have been looking for. Press spacebar. So now we can see a little bit of the red, a little bit of the press spacebar, but it is mostly. So yes, alpha is working, and it was definitely not working on when we were doing the draw clear alpha. Why wasn't draw clear alpha working? I don't know. Should have. So there we go. So let's hook up the animation. So kind of have, so this is the hard part with transitions is it's like you do something and then you want nothing else to happen while you're doing the start of the transition, and then you change rooms and then you start fading in. So you kind of have this sequence of events, and you could use sequences, but I don't use sequences for very many things. I'm trying to get used to using these new features for cool things, but I'm old. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm kind of set in my ways. So we're going to do it the way I always do it, with the timer and a length and a lerp or whatever. So I'm going to say I'm going to have a single variable that's like keep track of whether I'm fading in or fading out. So is fading out equals true. So we're going to fade out first and then fade in. Then this is kind of a simple state machine. So if we're fading out, else is fading out. Little naming convention recommendation here. If you've got a variable that you know is going to be true or false, try and suggest that in the name of the variable. Is fading out, yes or no? Has a sword, yes or no? So little naming convention tip. All right, so if we are is fading out, if is fading out, we want to reduce or increase our alpha from 0 to 1 based on timer. So to do that, we're going to use lerp, because I use lerp for everything. I could probably just use math, but whatever. Alpha equals lerp. We're going from 0 to 1 alpha. We're doing a timer over length. And if timer greater than or equal to length, then room go to, well, probably should have a target room variable, huh? Equals room test for now. Again, we'll make this more dynamic in the future when we need it to be more dynamic, but for right now, we'll just have that. So, and we can say is fading out equals false, because we are now fading in. Then we can have, oh, and timer equals 0, no matter what. Yeah, we want to increment our timer. Put this at the top, put it at the bottom. It's probably not going to make a difference. So timer equals 0. So now we can handle if we're fading in, and it's going to be very similar to this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste that. We're going from 1 to 0 this time. And if timer is greater than length, we're done with this guy. So we're just going to instance destroy him. Okay, I think that should work. So now when we say a room go to or press start, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to say instance create depth. Oh, another handy. I don't even have it over there. I always just end up writing it. So let's do another one here. Script. Instance create. I do this a lot. I don't really care about the position of the object or the depth of the object or anything but what instance I want to create. So I just have the object here. So we could do X and Y as well. That sometimes is helpful. But I know I'm going to need an object. So what do I want to create? Object instance create depth 0, 0, 0, object And then we're going to return that ID. There we go. That's a nice object. Nice little function. So that general helpers and Explorer. Grab the GML, drag it over to my helpful scripts folder. Oh, now that one's up on Dropbox too. Cool. So back to our step of press start. And we're just going to do an instance create of object fade transition. And we have a problem. If I just mash the space bar as fast as I can, I'm going to keep creating object fade transitions. Also, as soon as I fade out, well, let's see what this is going to do. There's definitely 2 bugs. Let's go ahead and hit them. Okay, well, first off, we got that there was one sitting in room init we don't want. So there's one bug I didn't anticipate. Let's try that again. Okay, so push spacebar, fade it out. There was probably didn't see it on YouTube. There's a 1 frame of black before it started fading out, which suggests to me that, oh yeah, our alpha was set to 5, so we're going to do that. And we're going to make this a little longer, so it's a little bit more obvious that it's fading out, so we can catch any bugs. Oh, okay. So the fade out looked good. The fade in didn't happen. So why not? Well, let's look at the fade transition. Look at its step event. And right here, we've got a room go to when we're done fading out. And right here, we have the fade in. But that's not happening because this object's not persistent. So when we switch rooms, it gets destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore. So we don't get our nice fade in. So let's press spacebar, fade into our nice blue screen. Other issue, as I mentioned earlier, if we object press start in our step event, we're just saying if keyboard check press VK space, make an instance of object fade transition. So let's see what happens if I just make a whole bunch of them. It worked, but it wasn't pretty. Or from a technical standpoint, it wasn't pretty. There was probably like 10 instances of object fade transition, all fading and doing their own thing. And if I had anything even slightly more complicated than a fade transition, it probably would have been more obvious, but not a good thing. So the easiest way to prevent this, and sure I'll need to complicate it eventually, is to say and not instance exists object fade transition. So that will ensure that as soon as I've created an instance of object fade transition, we can't create any more because this will prevent this code from running. So there we go. Eventually, later down the line, we'll need this to be a lot more complicated. You're going to want the game to freeze. Like say you have the project, say I have a whole bunch of characters on screen and I hit a transition point on the screen. I need to remove control from the player. I need to make sure that maybe enemies freeze, projectiles on screen freeze. The game ultimately pauses while I go through the transition so that NPCs, enemies, bullets, spells, things like that don't interrupt the transition and cause bugs and issues. So this is only going to work for a little while, but that's all we need to do right now. So we're going to leave it that way. So I screwed up somehow, which of course I did. Sees. Run it again. Get out. Fade in. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna change that back to be a little bit snappier, and also going to do it instantly. So I don't have to push spacebar anymore. And if I really wanted to speed things up as I get into testing, I'm just going to make this fade like 5 frames. So where I push play. There. Very brief blip of the press start screen, then we're into our test room. So now that that's there, we're ready to get in and start building our game. By the time I get back, I'll have had to think about that and decided whether we're doing a top-down or a platformer. So before we leave, source control. You can see I've got some uncommitted changes. So file status. Yep, there's our new scripts, sprite, fade transition. YY is always gonna, that's your, always gonna have changes in the YYP right there. So stage all, added test room with basic position. That, push that up. And now I think we're ready to figure out what we're gonna make. I'll be back in the next video with that decision made.